Joshua and Roberto arrived in Richford and made their way to the first hotel they saw. It was an older building with only a few cars in the parking lot. They thought that was good though, since they didn't want anyone snooping around or getting suspicious. They checked in and made their way to their room. Joshua flopped down on the queen-size bed and let out a long sigh. Roberto sat on the edge of the other bed and pulled the officer's card out of his pocket. Sheriff's Deputy Latini, he read to himself. He flipped the card over to find her full name, Bethany K. Latini, and her phone number. Joshua rolled to his side and propped his head up with his arm. "Do you really think this officer is going to help us?" Roberto snapped out of his trance-like state and looked at Joshua for a few moments before replying. "I'm not sure. She seems like she wants answers as much as we do." Joshua sat up and took off one of his shirts and leaned against the headboard, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Isn't it strange how all these town people are acting?" Roberto asked. "You mean how they're a bunch of over-paranoid country bumpkins with no manners?" Joshua said, smirking. "No," Roberto started. Joshua interrupted him. "I know what you're saying, man. They act like they've never seen another human being, and since we're not from here, we're aliens or something." Joshua said without even turning his head to glance at Roberto. "I can't believe that one fat cop. What was his name? Carl? I've never met a cop that wasn't willing to help a civilian, and then put his hands on us." Roberto stood up and trudged to the bathroom. "Don't let him get to you. He obviously takes his job way too seriously," Joshua said, chuckling to himself. Roberto stepped out of the bathroom. "It's not just that he takes his job too seriously. He's hiding something. They're all hiding something. It's like some weird secret that they all just overlook. Like that's why they got all defensive when we asked questions. I don't know. It's just all so weird." Roberto made his way back to his bed, sat on the edge, and turned to Joshua. "So you really think there is more to this than just some ignorant backwoods people?" Joshua pondered. "Yeah, man, I do. There has to be more to this. You don't hear about people being crucified in a small rural town every day." Roberto rubbed his eyes and then looked down at the floor. "You don't hear about people being crucified, period. I think we should call that deputy and see if she can shed more light on the situation. She has to know more than we do," Joshua offered. Roberto pulled out his cell phone and dialed her number. The phone rang several times, but someone finally picked up. "Hello?" a female voice answered. "Hi, this is Roberto. We talked to the station. We're at the hotel in Richmond, and we'd like to discuss a few things," Roberto responded in a nervous tone. "I'm so glad you actually called. I was worried that you were too freaked out by the whole situation and would just hightail it out of here. I'm off duty tomorrow. I can meet you in the morning. What hotel are you staying at?" she replied with a bit of excitement in her voice. "We're at the Pioneer Motel Inn. It's the first hotel as soon as you enter town. There's not too many other guests here." "What time should we expect you?" Roberto asked. "Well, how about 10? she inquired. "10 is fine. We'll see you in the morning then." Roberto hung up the phone and looked at Joshua. "Well, we're either going to meet Deputy Latini or get arrested tomorrow morning at 10. Roberto smirked and chuckled for one of the first times since they arrived at the area. The rest of the evening went by normally. They went to grab some pizza from a local pizza place and watched a little TV before going to bed. Joshua woke up with a start to a blood-curdling scream. He looked over to Roberto to see him screaming and writhing in the bed. Joshua sat on the edge of the bed and started to shake Roberto. "Roberto, wake up! Come on, man!" Joshua shouted as he continued to shake his friend by the shoulders. Roberto grew quiet, and his eyes shot open. He felt around under his covers, and his eyes darted around the room. "Are you okay, dude?" Joshua asked. Roberto propped himself up. "I was having the worst nightmares," he replied through desperate gasps. "John and Jake were in my dreams. It was so strange. They were mutilated and just..." Joshua interrupted Roberto. "It's okay. It was a bad dream. It's only 7:30 or so. Why don't I go get us some coffee and something to eat for breakfast?" Joshua offered, patting his friend on the back. Joshua pulled on a t-shirt and headed down to the car. He had remembered seeing a small coffee shop on their way to the hotel, so he headed there. The shop's sign was old, and the paint was so weathered he couldn't begin to tell what the name of the place was. There was worn paint on the windows that said, "Fresh coffee," and "Homemade donuts." Joshua walked into the dimly lit shop and looked over the array of pastries. A somewhat grimy, overweight man lumbered from the back of the shop. "Hey there, what can I do for you?" the man croaked in a voice that was riddled with emphysema. The man laid his chubby fingers on the top of the glass and grinned widely, showing 2 rows of yellowed teeth. I just need 2 large coffees and a half dozen of glazed donuts," Joshua finally managed to mumble. "You're not from around here, huh?" the man said, still grinning. "No, I'm not. Just visiting," Joshua replied. The man only nodded and his grin faded. Joshua paid for the coffee and donuts and started to leave the shop. "Don't stick around too long, boy. Sometimes you can get sucked into this easy lifestyle and you just may never get out." The man bellowed with laughter. Joshua nearly ran to his car with an uneasy feeling in his stomach. "What the hell is wrong with these people?" he asked out loud to the empty car. He made his way back to the hotel. Joshua could hear the shower running, so he went to the bathroom door and said loudly, "I'm back with breakfast, man." "Okay, I'll be out in a minute," Roberto yelled back over the rush of the water. Roberto came out of the bathroom in gym shorts and t-shirt, sat down on the bed and sighed loudly. "Try one of these donuts. They're really good. But the guy working that shop was a creep," Joshua said through a mouthful of donuts. "A creep? How is he a creep?" Roberto asked as he rolled his eyes at Joshua. "He just was, okay?" Joshua responded defensively. The next 2 hours were dragging by as Joshua and Roberto waited for Deputy Latini to arrive. Around 9:45, there was a soft knock on the hotel room door. Roberto jumped up and slowly opened the door. "Hey," Deputy Lentini said with a smile. "Come in, please," Roberto said. "We had an early breakfast, otherwise we'd offer you coffee," Joshua said. "Oh, what did you have?" Deputy Lentini asked. "I got donuts from that little place when you enter town," Joshua said with a little bit of disgust lingering in his voice. Richford's Donuts. Great donuts, but the owner's a creep," she replied, laughing. Joshua raised a brow at Roberto. Roberto replied silently by shaking his head and rolling his eyes. "So, what exactly are you guys here for?" Deputy Lentini asked. "Well, we're here to get answers about our 2 best friends' brutal deaths. That's it. Plain and simple," Roberto responded as he rested his elbows on his knees. "Well, to tell you the truth, your guesses are about as good as mine. I was transferred here about 8 months ago, and it is by far the strangest area I've ever worked in. The townspeople are so secretive and reclusive. The officers I work with are not any more informative. They normally put me on dispatch duty, so I'm hidden away in the back of the station," she replied with remorse in her voice. Joshua furrowed his brows. "So, they didn't tell you anything about 2 of the most violent murders this town has probably ever seen?" Deputy Lentini nodded and continued. "I never get to go on calls. Not that we get too many of them. If I'm not on dispatch duty, they might let me sit somewhere and try to catch people speeding, but that's it. It was my day off on the day of the murders. It was barely mentioned on the local news, and when I started asking questions about the details of it the next day, I was shut down. The 2 officers I work with said it wasn't fit to discuss with a lady." Roberto politely interrupted. "So you're a cop in this town, and they didn't tell you any of the details? I'm sorry to sound so unconvinced, but it's just hard to believe." Roberto's eyes moved to the floor. "You're preaching to the choir," Deputy Lentini replied, patting Roberto on the back lightly. "This town is so strange. I don't know what the townspeople are protesting or hiding, but it has to be something serious. I tried to question witnesses about the murders, and I received one of the 2 answers from everyone. Either I didn't see anything, or they just didn't answer the door at all. We get a lot of missing persons notices that come through our office. Every police station in the area the person was last seen in gets the notices, but there are always people who are out-of-towners. It doesn't help that a serial killer's house is still standing either," Deputy Lentini trailed off. "Whoa, wait a second. A serial killer used to live in this town?" Roberto shrieked. Deputy Lentini nodded. "I'm sorry to have gotten off subject from those happenings in town, but it's one of the strangest things in this town. Ed Gein's house is on the outside of town, up off the interstate a little ways." She paused for several seconds. "Wait, who's Ed Gein?" Joshua said with confusion in his voice. Roberto looked at Deputy Lentini with curiosity in his eyes. Lentini sat quietly for several seconds before beginning. Ed Gein was a murderer and body snatcher between 1947 and 57. A body snatcher? Roberto asked with a furrowed brow. Let me explain. Please save all questions until the end, Deputy Lentini replied playfully. He was considered a body snatcher because he confessed to the authorities that he made visits to local graveyards to dig up bodies. He made an estimated 40 visits to the graveyards between 1947 and 57. Gein would dig up bodies of young women. If they resembled his mother, he would take them home, skin them, tan their skin, and make various items. Joshua and Roberto looked at each other with looks of disgust and interest in their faces. Lentini continued. He also confessed to killing 2 women. One of the women was discovered in his shed, decapitated and hung upside down, as if she was a game animal. Upon further inspection of the house that still stands on the hill in Plainsfield, they found whole human bones, human skin, covered chair seats, skulls in the bedposts, and other grotesque creations. It was said that Gein had a very strange relationship with his mother, and after she died, he was trying to make a skin suit out of women who looked like his mother, so he could become his mother. This might sound similar to the classic movie Psycho. That one and a few other movies are actually based on Gein's gruesome crimes. He was tried in '68, but was found to be unfit for trial and was sent to a mental institution to serve the rest of his days. He died on July 26th of '84 from lung cancer. Lentini sat back in her chair. So the house is still standing. Is that the creepy farmhouse that's up on the hill, right as you get to Plainfield city limits? Joshua asked with excitement in his voice. Deputy Lentini nodded. Well, I need to head back to town. I don't want anyone to get suspicious. Lentini stood up and made her way to the door of the hotel room. Be careful, guys. If anyone from Plainsfield tries to contact you, let me know. She opened the door to leave. Thank you for all your help, Deputy. Joshua and Roberto almost replied in unison. She laughed. You can drop that deputy stuff. Just call me Bethany. She walked to her car. And Joshua and Roberto were left with more questions than before. Later that evening, they drove to a small restaurant that was across from the hotel. As they approached the door, they saw several kids sitting on a bench in front of the restaurant. The kids' bikes were leaning against the building, and several of them had sodas in their hands. The boys watched Joshua and Roberto approach the restaurant. Joshua and Roberto said hi to the boys, and were about to head inside when one spoke. He was a young boy around 10 or 12. He had dusty blonde hair and freckles covering his face from being in the summer sun. You guys aren't from around here, huh? The boy chirped. No, we're not, Joshua laughed. Oh, we just wanted to get away from the city for a few days, Roberto chimed in. Well, make sure you stay away from Plainfield, one of the other boys said with warning in his tone. Joshua and Roberto stopped and turned to the group of boys. Why should we stay away from Plainfield? Joshua asked. He leaned down to be eye level with the boy. Well, because there's an old farmhouse that sits up on the hill before you get to Plainfield from here. The boy paused for several seconds. My big brother and all his friends say that... The boy put his hand by his mouth and motioned for Joshua and Roberto to lean closer. They say there's a monster that lives in the basement of that house. The boy looked at them with a very serious expression on his face. An older, taller boy stepped back from the group. Oh, shut up! There isn't no monster in that house! You're telling fibs! The older boy glared at the smaller boy. The young boy shrank back and put his head down. Joshua and Roberto exchanged glances and smirked. Don't worry. We'll make sure to stay clear of the monster, Roberto said as he roughed up the boy's hair. Joshua and Roberto walked into the restaurant and then started to laugh at the boy's response. A monster in the basement.